For centuries, Mary Magdalene has been trapped in an unfair and often distorted narrative. Did you know that she was labeled a sinner without any biblical basis? That's right. This is one of the biggest lies in the history of Christianity. But why was the story of a woman who stood by Jesus during his most crucial moments so distorted? Here's the point. By erasing her true role as a spiritual leader, the idea that women hold secondary positions in faith was perpetuated. And of course, this was no coincidence. If you think Mary Magdalene was just another follower among many, prepare to be amazed. She not only witnessed the crucifixion, but was also the first to see Jesus after the resurrection. Isn't it curious that a woman was chosen to carry the most important message in Christian history? And yet, she was turned into a symbol of repentance rather than leadership. Why did this happen? This question might just change everything you know about the role of women in spirituality. But wait, it's not just about religion. It's about how narratives shape our lives, our beliefs, and even the space we allow for women's voices in our communities. Imagine the impact of correcting a story that has been distorted for over 1,000 years. What can we learn from Mary Magdalene's true legacy? And how can it reform the doctrines we know today? Let's dive into this journey, uncover the truth, and who knows, find inspiration to reevaluate not only history, but the future. For over 1,000 years, Mary Magdalene was unjustly labeled as a sinner, stemming from a misinterpretation popularized by Pope Gregory in 591 AD. The Bible never made such a claim, yet this misconception became intertwined with Christian culture, redefining not only her story, but also perceptions of women in faith. Think about it. What if, instead of being seen as a repentant sinner, Mary had been recognized for her vital role as a true spiritual leader? A closer look at the Gospels reveals that Mary Magdalene wasn't just a devoted follower of Jesus. She was present during the most critical moments. Her presence at the crucifixion and later as the first witness to Jesus' resurrection speaks volumes about her significance. Imagine being the one chosen to deliver the most transformative message in Christian history. And yet, her figure was diminished over time. Isn't it fascinating how narratives shape our understanding and can even limit the role of great women in history? This distortion affects far more than just one person's reputation. When Mary is seen as the repentant sinner, it reinforces centuries of stereotypes placing women in secondary roles, emphasizing redemption over leadership. This dynamic still resonates today, as women's roles in religious leadership are often questioned. Now, imagine revisiting this story with fairness. Recognizing Mary Magdalene's true legacy could be the first step in correcting a historic injustice. And that brings us to an even bigger question. What else in history has been shaped by narrative manipulation? Few biblical figures play as impactful a role as Mary Magdalene. She was not just a devoted follower of Jesus. She stood by him when others faltered. At the crucifixion, while many disciples fled, Mary stayed. Imagine the courage it took to face the risk and terror of being present during such a brutal and historic moment. Her example challenges any notion of women's fragility and reinforces how essential her presence was in pivotal moments. Now, think about the privilege of being the first person to witness Jesus' resurrection. It wasn't Peter, John, or another apostle. It was Mary Magdalene who received this divine revelation. This not only solidifies her role as apostle to the apostles, but it also demonstrates Jesus' trust in her to deliver the most important message of the Christian faith. It's almost impossible to ignore the impact of this. Yet history tried to erase it. What a powerful lesson this offers about valuing women's leadership. Even more fascinating is how her story challenges paradigms. When she announced to the disciples that Christ had risen, she wasn't just relaying a fact. She was fulfilling a spiritual leadership mission. Reflect on how this moment redefines our view of authority and faith. Mary didn't seek permission. She acted. And perhaps that's one of the greatest lessons. To act with courage and purpose, even when the world tries to diminish your importance. Her crucial role makes us wonder how leadership like hers could inspire reevaluations of doctrine and tradition today. Mary Magdalene didn't earn the title apostle to the apostles by accident. This recognition didn't come from later interpretations, but from early Christian texts that highlight her unique position. Think about it. She not only witnessed Jesus' resurrection, but was also tasked with delivering this news to the other disciples. In a time when women's testimonies held little social value, she was chosen to announce a message that would change the course of Christian history. Imagine the weight of that responsibility. The symbolism here goes far beyond the surface. When Jesus entrusted her with the mission to share the resurrection, he broke the social conventions of his time. Mary wasn't just a devoted follower of Jesus. She was a spiritual leader who deeply understood his teachings. This act by Jesus is, in itself, a powerful message about equality and the role of women in ministry. How might this example reform doctrines that, to this day, limit women's positions in religious leadership? This title, Apostle to the Apostles, also exposes the contradiction between historical facts and the narratives constructed over centuries. Why, then, was her story obscured and diminished? The answer lies in examining how institutions have historically shaped narratives to serve their own interests. Mary's strength as a leader isn't just in the moment she lived, but in the legacy she could have left if her full story had been told. And this leads us to an intriguing question. How do texts like the Gospel of Mary challenge the narratives we think we know? The Gospel of Mary invites us to rethink everything we thought we knew about her. This apocryphal text not only highlights Mary Magdalene's profound spiritual connection with Jesus, but also reveals her unique understanding of his teachings. Imagine this. In a time when spiritual authority was almost exclusively male, Mary emerges as a leader who challenged norms and inspired other disciples. Isn't it intriguing how this narrative has remained hidden for so long? In the Gospel of Mary, she isn't just a follower but a guide. The disciples themselves, in moments of doubt, turn to her for answers. What a powerful image, don't you think? However, this role of spiritual leadership was systematically sidelined by the texts that were included in the official canon. What does this tell us about the Church's intent to construct a male-dominated authority structure? The exclusion of the Gospel of Mary reminds us how narratives are often crafted to serve power and control. What's most impressive about this text is its emphasis on deep spiritual concepts like unity with the divine and liberation from fear. Mary Magdalene not only understood but also taught these truths in a way that resonated with the other disciples. What if this broader vision of faith had been incorporated into Christian doctrine? Perhaps religious institutions today would look very different. When we encounter texts like the Gospel of Mary, we begin to see how her ideas can still challenge established beliefs and open the door to more inclusive conversations about faith and leadership. The legends and relics associated with Mary Magdalene are among the most fascinating chapters of her story. It's said that after Jesus' resurrection, she traveled to southern France, bringing with her the message of the gospel. Today, the Basilica of Saint Marie Madeleine in Saint Maximin la Saint Baume claims to house her relics. Imagine the impact of such a significant figure crossing borders and leaving her spiritual mark on distant lands. It's no wonder she continues to inspire debates and pilgrimages around the world. These legends about Mary Magdalene not only spark curiosity, but also support the idea that her role was far greater than traditional narratives suggest. In some traditions, she is seen as a pioneering missionary, spreading Jesus' teachings to a world barely grasping their significance. For many, she represents a bridge between Christian spirituality and the mystery of hidden truths. What impact could it have if we explored these stories more deeply in our spiritual practices? The relics attributed to her, on the other hand, carry immense symbolism. They are seen as tangible testimonies of her existence and legacy. But beyond their physical value, what do they really tell us? They challenge us to look beyond conventional narratives and recognize that Mary was not just a devoted follower of Jesus, but a leader whose contributions transcend centuries. And this leads us to reflect. What else has history tried to hide, and how can these truths redefine our understanding of leadership and faith? The distorted portrayal of Mary Magdalene as a repentant sinner is not just a historical error. It is a glaring example of how narratives can shape perceptions and reinforce stereotypes. For over 1,400 years, her image was used to justify the idea that women's roles in faith are secondary, rooted in redemption rather than leadership. Have you ever wondered how this kind of narrative affects not only the past, but also the present? Even today, these stereotypes echo, in religious and cultural institutions. These distortions are not confined to the religious sphere. They influence how women are perceived in positions of power and leadership in general. Mary Magdalene's story shows us the importance of correcting these histories. Imagine if, instead of focusing on a narrative of redemption, her story highlighted her role as the apostle to the apostles and her courage in witnessing Jesus' crucifixion and announcing his resurrection. This could open the door to a new perspective on women's contributions, both in the past and the present. And it doesn't stop there. These stereotypes have even shaped how doctrines were constructed over time. When Mary was reduced to a sinner, the implicit message was clear. Women should not lead. But by revisiting her true story and celebrating her role as a devoted follower of Jesus and spiritual leader, we can begin to question and reform outdated views. What more can we discover when we start to dismantle historical distortions? That's where the discussion about women's contributions truly begins to gain momentum. Mary Magdalene's story is not just about her. It's about all the women whose contributions have been silenced throughout history. When texts like the Gospel of Mary are excluded from the official canon, what is lost is not just a different perspective, but an essential piece of the spiritual puzzle. This deliberate exclusion makes us wonder, how many other stories could we be telling if women's voices had been valued? Mary's leadership challenges the structures that insist on keeping women in supporting roles. Reducing Mary Magdalene to a figure of redemption rather than a spiritual leader is symptomatic of a larger issue. This historical erasure reflects an attempt to keep women in subordinate positions within religious institutions. What if texts like the Gospel of Mary had been widely accepted? Perhaps today, we would have a much richer and more balanced understanding of women's roles in faith. This not only challenges old narratives, but also opens doors to reevaluating what it means to lead in any context. And this suppression is not confined to the past. Even today, women's contributions are often overlooked or minimized. Think of how stories of visionary women, like Mary, could inspire future generations. When we look at the lasting impact of Mary Magdalene's true legacy, we're not just reevaluating history. We're shaping a future where all voices, regardless of gender, can be heard. Are we ready to revisit these stories and let them challenge us to change? Religious doctrines don't emerge in a vacuum. They are shaped by human decisions, often influenced by social and political contexts. The way Mary Magdalene has been portrayed over the centuries is a perfect example of this. When the Church chose to reduce her role to a figure of repentance, it also shaped how women would be viewed in religious structures. After all, how can the status quo be questioned when history itself has declared that spiritual leadership was not their place? This is where we begin to see the profound impact of these misconceptions. This historical distortion was much more than a simple misinterpretation. It was a strategy that helped consolidate a patriarchal system within religious institutions. By emphasizing Mary's image as the repentant sinner, the narrative perpetuated the idea that women are better suited for supporting roles rather than leadership. But if we look at the Gospels and Mary's role as apostle to the apostles, it's clear she represents something entirely different. The question is, why was this version of her story sidelined? Reforming doctrines is no easy task, but Mary's story offers a pathway to rethink ancient narratives and create space for previously silenced voices. By recognizing her true role as a devoted follower of Jesus and spiritual leader, we also recognize the potential to challenge and transform structures that limit women. Imagine the impact this could have on faith communities worldwide. Revisiting her true story is not just an exercise in historical correction, it's an act of spiritual and cultural restoration. And this leads us to explore what else her life and legacy have to teach us. Reassessing Mary Magdalene's story isn't just about historical justice. It's a call to rethink how we shape our spiritual and societal narratives. For too long, her story has been reduced to a caricature of redemption instead of a testament to leadership and courage. When we return to the texts and contexts, we find a woman who was present at the most crucial moments of Jesus' life, witnessing his crucifixion and being the first to announce his resurrection. That alone should have rewritten how we perceive women's roles in faith. But what else does her story teach us? Mary was more than a follower. She was a pioneer, a leader who challenged the norms of her time. Her presence in the Gospels and her title as apostle to the apostles aren't just symbols of her spiritual role, but also of her ability to inspire others. Reassessing her story forces us to think about how many other women's voices have been silenced over time. What if we began to make space for these stories today? How would that change the future of spirituality? This reassessment isn't confined to the religious sphere. Mary Magdalene offers us a lens through which we can examine how narratives shape gender perceptions in every aspect of life. By acknowledging her true significance, we open the door to a broader discussion about the value of women as leaders, visionaries, and pioneers in various fields. Revisiting her story isn't just an act of historical correction. It's a vital step toward reforming our beliefs and expectations. And that brings us to a larger question. What other stories need to be told or retold to fully understand the scope of women's impact on history? Now that you've uncovered the true story of Mary Magdalene, it's impossible not to wonder. How many other narratives have been shaped to serve specific agendas? And more importantly, what will you do with this knowledge? Revisiting Mary's legacy isn't just about historical justice. It's about creating space for new leadership, new voices, and new perspectives, especially those of women who have so often been pushed into the background. Have you ever stopped to think about the impact your own voice could have? Mary Magdalene was a woman who defied the norms of her time, led with courage, and challenged expectations. That's something we can all learn to apply, whether at work, in family life, or even in conversations about faith. Why not start questioning what you've been told is unchangeable? Perhaps, by doing so, you'll also begin to rewrite the legacy you leave for the future. So, the final question: what will you do with this knowledge? Will you let this story inspire your actions, or will you continue to accept incomplete versions of reality? This isn't just about Mary Magdalene. It's about understanding the importance of bringing hidden truths to light and giving space to those who've been silenced. Want to learn more about these transformative stories? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let's keep this conversation about legacy, leadership, and courage alive. The next step is in your hands.